Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining us. My guest today is going to talk about his experiences in the military. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your experience when you joined the military.
Hi, my name is Zach, and I'm 38 years old, and I joined the Army when I was 19. I had a feeling I was going to join the Army my senior year in high school. It was just after 9/11. At that time, a lot of guys were leaving the high school to join the military instead of go to college. And I ended up following a few of my best friends into the Army. And I went to basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma for artillery. I was a 13 Bravo cannon crew member. And shortly after that, early 2004, I was shipped off to Baumholder, Germany, where I did my entire term in the military. I had a 3-year contract, which was kind of rare. And while I was in Germany, I deployed to Iraq in 2005 and 2006. I had a 1-year deployment in Iraq and Kuwait. It was a split deployment. We thought we were going into Baghdad right when we landed in Kuwait, but at the time, Bush had a lot of troops in Baghdad, and I think the war was becoming questionable here at home, and people were wondering why we were there for so long. So they started holding a lot of us back from crossing the border, along with my brigade. We were there in Kuwait for 8 months, and we did nonstop training until we finally got orders when things were getting bad in Baghdad to move north into Baghdad. Just being there that short period of time, 4.5 months or so, I witnessed more than I thought I would have ever imagined. I think it was the first day in theater. I witnessed mortar land next to in front of our Humvees. I was tasked to take some standard stock Humvees to a mechanic to have them put up armored steel on them so that we can use them on our routes. And on the way there, we were attacked. It was very odd. It was a very eerie situation being in Baghdad. I'd like to reverse a little bit and go back to Germany. It was 2004, February 2004, when I got there. My first experience, my first task that I was tasked to do was to go through a duffel bag. And I didn't know why I was going through that duffel bag, but I was supposed to separate military belongings from personal belongings. And it wasn't until I dumped that duffel bag out and a military ID fell out that I realized that person had recently been killed. And it was my first few weeks as a real soldier, fresh out of basic training and school, where I was already becoming immersed in the death of war, the dark, hard parts of combat. It was an intimate experience to go through that person's duffel bag. It was very humbling, and I remember being really just kind of this empty feeling inside. Shortly after that, we had lost the unit was still deployed in Baghdad for their first tour in 2003. in 2003, 2004, while I was in Germany with a handful of people on rear detachment. And we had just lost 8 soldiers to one car bomb, which was a significant loss. I was asked to be on a guard at the church for the 21 gun salute, with a few other soldiers. That was I was honored to take that role. But again, when those shots rang off and you can hear the people inside the church crying, the families, it just hit home. It was this very real experience. That was the beginning of my military experience, was just this well-known fact that there's no doubt in my 3-year contract I will be deployed. If it wasn't that deployment, it will be the next a year later. And it did in fact happen. And by that time I was ready. We had been training for a year and we were all ready to go. But nothing can prepare you for the reality that is war. The people, the friends, I feel fortunate that I wasn't involved in a lot of direct combat, but I witnessed a lot of combat. I witnessed car bombs. I witnessed mortar attacks. I witnessed massive explosions from a mortar attack. I witnessed aircraft attacks on a city next to Baghdad. And I went to, by the end of that term, about 25 memorial services and a good handful of people that I knew. On our last mission, my friend Carl, he volunteered to go out on the last mission, which, had I known about it, I would have volunteered to go out on one last hurrah mission. We were both machine gunners and we were in the middle of the heat. I think there's this place that I crossed in my mind, after you're in the Middle East for so long and you're dealing with combat, that you find this acceptance that you might not make it through the night. You may not go home at the end of this deployment. And it was a weird place for me to swallow that pill and just accept what is. And that was one of the first times in my life I kind of just let go and let the experience take me on the ride, and whatever happens. It was a bizarre experience. But going back to Carl, he had volunteered for that last mission out, and we were training 4th ID on our routes, and something went south and EFP went off and it killed him instantly. And he was a good friend of mine. Death was such a huge theme of my military experience, but when you're a soldier, you push that down. You put it behind you. You don't really acknowledge it, because that's the reality. Like, you could die, your friends could die, and you could kill someone, and people are gonna die. Like, that's what war is. It's just something that you accept, but you don't realize. I guess I didn't realize how strong of an impact that would have on me years later.
So, in your training with the military, do they do anything to help you prep for such situations or losses or feelings?
Not that early in the military. I would imagine that they do now, at least that they have something. I would hope, but I don't know that for sure. Uh, we've there's I have a personal mission to share my story with a lot of people, and I appreciate you having me on your podcast. But one of the hardest things that I learned in the last 10 years is that uh, the number of people who've committed suicide, the amount of veterans who've committed suicide and lost their lives here at home, triple that number of people who have died overseas in combat, and those Afghanistan and Iraq combined. So that's the answer that I don't have the answer to that question, but my story was a lot of self-seeking myself, like for help when I got home. That we had a very brief hour-long. It was called a reintegration um, uh, meeting in a way. It was like when we got back from Iraq, we were all going to this big building where we kind of were briefed on our experience, and like, if you need some help, here's a number, here's a card, and like, we're reintegrating you back. But really, like, no one, we all just wanted to go back and start drinking. Like, that was the reality. We were all so anxious to go back and see our families and start opening up beers again, and be normal. But I had a really unique position. I maybe not that unique, but it was an odd situation being a single soldier in Germany, returning from combat. They have a big ceremony, and then they let down the banner, and all the wives and family and kids come running towards their loved ones, while all of us single soldiers at the time just kind of slipped out the back door, and there was nobody waiting with open arms for us. Just it was different. It was, and I don't think that's talked about, but that had an impact on me. It really did. I missed my family. I couldn't wait to come home, and I had nobody there. I was thankful for my friends and those people I served with, because we went back to carry on like normal. But no, I don't. To answer your question, I don't know what is available now these days, as far as information to prepare for the return of combat. I learned, and my seeking began a few months after coming home in 2007, because we got back November 2006, and I got out of the Army in January 2007. My brother and I and his girlfriend, we all moved in together, and in a little apartment in downtown Everett, and got myself a crappy job just to kind of start off with. And I was angry at the world. I didn't realize that everywhere I was going, I was speeding. I was you come back with this cocky attitude, like, the best way I can describe is how my counselor described it is, you've been living at peak, you've been living off of peak jet fuel for a year and a half, and you come home and you don't need that jet fuel while everyone else is running off of unleaded regular, and you're going 100 miles an hour down the highway while everyone else is doing 60. And that's really what it was like. And I would get in arguments with people. I would just coming home, it was like you're in this whole new peer group. All of a sudden, you're nowhere near the people you served with, and you're in a society that doesn't understand anything, and you don't understand why you're there. And I think my brother and I got in a few arguments about something stupid, and he told me that I needed help. And I think those words rang loud and clear. Like, that was the moment I started questioning if I actually did. And I was referred to the Seattle VA, and I went there and got an appointment with a psychiatrist. They referred me to a I don't even know his position, but he was like a pharmacist that took orders at like basically going through McDonald's and ordering whatever you wanted. It was a very bizarre experience. And then I was also referred to counseling at that time. I struggled with the medications and decided that I wasn't going to take them, and I was going to try to do this without medication. And I started counseling. And that's where my journey to healing really began. And that was probably 2 years after deployment. It was a struggle coming back home.
So you bring up an issue that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is suicide. I know the suicide rate for soldiers coming back from a deployment, especially if they've seen action, if you will, whatever, is very high. And that breaks my heart because you all went over there and defended our country, and I thank you for that. So in this podcast, I'm going to make sure that we also link people to suicide survivor things and questioning things about that. So when you talk about coming back, I mean, you were still a really young guy. What, you're like 21 or whatever, and you came back from this? So you're really a young guy, and you are coming back, and most 21-year-olds, the most they've ever had to deal with is, I don't even know, like a speeding ticket? I'm not even sure what that would be. So the whole relating to people in your age group had to be really difficult. Like, how do you relate to someone who says the worst thing that ever happened to me was, I had a flat tire as I went to work today, and you're like, whoa, flat tire? Let me talk to you about a bad day, right? So how did you kind of deal with that reintegration with people when you came back from the war?
It was really hard, and it was hard to identify why I had a hard time dealing with it. I think that was the hardest part. Was you come home and you're suddenly around all this silly shit. People are always worried about all these things that seem so insignificant, and like I just got back from war. I just watched bombs drop on Solder City. Like, I don't even know why people are complaining about what they're complaining about. Like, it's insane to me. It really bothered me, and I think that's where a lot of my anger and frustration came from. That manifested into its own problems until later when I started to recognize it's frustrating. You feel like an enlightened one, and suddenly you're dropped off in this world of of morons. And like, I don't mean that really, but like, that's the cocky attitude you have when you have this intense awareness of the world around you. You always know who's behind you and where you're at. You always know how to exit a situation. You always are sizing up the area that you're around and the people you're around. It's difficult to live like that. Like, to move over a lane because you see a box or a bag on the side of the road and you really don't know what's in it, and you really do recognize, well, I'm driving the 2002 Volkswagen GTI, and I just moved over a lane because of a piece of trash on I-5. The second you start questioning that, that's just when you, like, to me, those were the things that slowly started to seed my mind with this reality that, like, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to be an enlightened one, like, I want to be normal again. And how do I get there, and how do I start that process?
You're describing obviously symptoms of PTSD. I mean, no doubt about it.
Oh,
So how did you get to the point where you no longer needed to change lanes when you saw a bit of debris on the highway, or um, be less I don't know, attentive to someone behind you in line at the grocery store, those types of things? How did you get to that spot where you could be more quote unquote normal member of society?
I think for myself, that really just took time, and recognition and talking about it. Um, it took me a while to start talking to people I knew about my military experience, especially my parents. My mom kind of poked and wanted to know more information because she's curious, and I know she loves me and she wants to know about my life. But it was hard for me to talk to her about those things, and I found it easier to start talking to people when it was more in like the like in a way you kind of feel like you have some stories and you want to show off a little bit and talk to people about the shit you've been through. And I that's where I started to open up. And I feel like in those conversations I recognized that I was actually benefiting from getting some of the stuff off my chest. And maybe it wasn't in the right context because I was kind of bragging about military experiences and the things that I did and all that. But like I realized that talking about it was beneficial. Um, I I didn't even start talking about my military experience, like the deeper parts of my military experience, with my counselor, honestly, for till actually not too long ago. Um, which we would talk about some things, but I didn't get into the details about a lot of things and like how I felt in certain situations, and like um, it took time. It takes time to to recognize where you're at when you. It took here. This is the part that for me that was a big game changer, was the part that I recognized I actually have problems, because I never wanted to believe that I was going to be affected like that. I wanted to believe that uh, I can still do everything everyone else can do. Um, I had low self-esteem in high school, and I struggled to keep up with my peers, and I judged myself heavily for that. So when I got out of the military, my number one goal was I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to college, and I'm going to get a degree, and I'm going to prove myself um, that I can do these things. But it took me years to finally break the ice and make that happen. Um, it wasn't without the help of my counseling, to overcome those small hurdles to start taking on the big ones, which eventually led to coping with PTSD.
So that said, I'm curious to know, if you could do it over again, would you still enlist in the army and go through all that experience?
I think about that a lot, because I think about, what would I want for my son? Would I want him to have that experience, to have that massive wealth of knowledge and wisdom that is so hard to get to? Or would I just want him to have an easy life, to have a good life? Like, don't do what I did. I debate about that all the time, and I'm on the fence so much, but I know that I would do it again, to have the understanding of who I am. Um, I don't think I know myself if it wasn't for my combat experience. Um, I would certainly not have the relationships with the people I served with, because I still know a lot of those guys and I still talk to them. There's this you just the brotherhood is real. Um and to have an opportunity like this to share my experience with, you know, the potential other vets who are listening into a podcast like this, then maybe they can relate, or maybe, we all had very unique experiences and we all see through different lenses on our experiences. But, what if there's an opportunity to to help change somebody, to help somebody recognize that they can overcome these kinds of things too. You don't have to be a veteran to have trauma. Uh, Almost everyone certainly has some trauma in their life, but um, being a veteran is a unique trauma, and that makes it difficult to connect to the world around you. Um, so there are resources, there are resources and there are things that you can do.
Yeah, so you brought up a really good point there that being a veteran is a different situation of trauma than other spots. So I also know that they reaching out for help, especially for emotional and counseling help in the military, it has a bit of a stigma attached to it. So we're all tough and we can get through this and so on and so forth. So if you were talking to someone who's been through, active combat, some kind of real life situations in the military, and they're back now in the real world here in the US and trying to, reacclimate to life here, what advice would you give them for how to make that transition as easy and painless as possible?
I think the first thing I would say, if I could speak to somebody who may or may not even be struggling, is just to have patience. Patience really is one of the hardest things to learn, and to have patience with yourself as you grow and learn through new experiences. Uh, I think for me that's just the starting point. But my journey was different. I think maybe I significantly different than other people. I don't really know. I mean, I know a lot of the guys who got out and went back in. I know everybody's different, but for me, I learned how to meditate. Um, I started meditating, and I realized that, like, there was a lot of noise in my head and a lot of sound happening in my voice. I could hear all the things I'm saying to myself all the time, and I just needed to learn how to silence that sound and bring my heart rate down, and bring the anxiety attacks down. Um, and that was there was that, and oddly, maybe not oddly, but oddly enough, I started getting into. I've always been an active person, and outdoors, and I started surfing right after I got home. Two of my best friends that I served in the Army with got stationed here at Fort Lewis, and they called me up one day and they're like, "Hey, we're going surfing. We're going to Seattle to buy some wetsuits and surfboards." I'm like, "Get the hell out of here. I grew up here. Like, you can't surf here." So I went with them and bought a wetsuit. And from that day forward, um, from that day forward, we started surfing almost every single weekend. And I realized while I was surfing that I'm going to get kind of hippie for a second, but being out in the ocean, the waves and just the swell of the up and down bobbing in the ocean, like, really put my mind in this trance. And then you had this intensity of, like, trying to get on the wave and wiping out and learning how to surf and, like, actually surfing big waves, and, like, you're figuring these things out, and this accomplishment, this personal accomplishment of, like, holy shit, I'm doing this. Like, I'm learning something new that I've never done before. It's both scary, intimidating, and very peaceful. And I think the combination between that peace and the adrenaline was the perfect balance for me to have the adrenaline fix that I missed from the military, that I I think a lot of us are addicted to when we are in combat. We enjoy that thrill of the unknown, and so I feel like in a way I was kind of compensating for all that. It became a type of medicine, and I surfed for 3 or 4 years, almost every single weekend in the better months. Um, was very into that, and that has transitioned into just a number of other hobbies I've picked up since. But finding something that is good for you and healthy for you, but both challenges you, I think is a really good thing uh, to 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 re to school your mind on how to cope with PTSD or trauma.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Zach. You're spot on. So I want to thank you for being my guest today. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and your thoughts. I also want to tell you I'm very, very thankful for you for your service, and thank you for that. And I'm glad you're a healthy member of society today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on the show. I appreciate you allowing me to share my story, and I hope that it reaches other people in a way that I wish maybe somebody would have been able to reach out to me. I had to figure a lot of this stuff out on my own as I go, but that's part of life. We
Yeah,
definitely have to
and
think.
that's definitely the point of this podcast is how do we help people who are behind us in their journey that we already walked, right? So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of the book, The Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. You can find the book on Amazon and Kindle.